I stood near the limestone wall inside Oak Ridge Manor during my brother Mason's suit fitting. Mason laughed loudly, telling his groomsmen that I drifted between temp jobs and lived off our father Raymond. I kept my head down, smoothing the wool seams while keeping my long sleeves pinned tight to my wrists. When best man Marcus stepped onto the fitting platform, I reached up to adjust his shoulder seam. My left sleeve slid back beneath the overhead lights, exposing thick, grafted burn tissue. Marcus turned pale, stared at the distinct thermal graft pattern, and immediately stepped outside with his phone without answering Mason's jokes. If you've ever been judged by those who never took the time to know your true worth, like and subscribe to stay tuned for the full story. I arrived back in suburban Pinecrest 5 days before my brother Mason's engagement dinner. I hauled my faded duffel bag up the narrow wooden stairs to the small apartment above the garage, the exact same room where I always stayed between search and rescue deployments. Downstairs in the fitting room of Oak Ridge Manor, the air smelled of heavy starch, costly cologne, and freshly cut lavender. My father, Raymond, and Mason stood near the tall mirror, completely engrossed in a loud deliberation over a $22,000 floral arrangement bill and Mason's recent tech stock wins. Neither of them had asked how my flight was, how long I was staying, or what my work looked like these days. To them, I was just a quiet fixture hovering near the wall, useful for smoothing fabric and staying out of sight. Mason turned on the wooden fitting platform, admiring the cut of his wool jacket. Groomsman Derek gestured toward me with his drink, asking who the quiet woman attending to the garments was. Mason snorted, a sharp, dismissive sound that bounced off the mirrors. He told Derek that I was his older sister, Clara, but that I could not hold down a real job to save my life and basically relied on our father's charity to keep a roof over my head. My father Raymond chuckled into his coffee cup, taking a slow sip without offering a single word of defense. I kept my eyes fixed on the silver nozzle of the handheld steamer, watching the hot mist hiss into the dark wool. I did not feel a fresh wave of anger. When you hear the same dismissive comments for years, old insults stop cutting like blades and simply become familiar furniture in the room. In emergency rescue service, you learn very quickly that personal ego is a luxury you cannot afford. When you are crawling through smoke or stabilizing a crushed limb under fallen timber, what people think about your resume does not matter. You suppress your desire for praise because survival requires complete focus. Over time, that professional discipline spills into your personal life. You let people believe whatever comfortable lies keep them quiet, because arguing with those who do not care to see you is a waste of vital energy. I stepped closer to the platform to finish the shoulder seam on Mason's suit. As I reached upward with the heavy steamer nozzle, the cuff of my long linen sleeve caught on the edge of the hanger and slipped backward 4 inches. Under the intense, unforgiving glow of the overhead fluorescent fitting lights, the thick, pale, grafted burn tissue across my left wrist and lower forearm was exposed completely. Marcus stopped laughing instantly. His hand reached out, grabbing my wrist with a firm, steady grip that instantly revealed his own tactical training. He leaned down, staring directly at the thick, mottled skin extending past my watch band. "Where did you get that thermal graft scar?" Marcus asked, his voice dropping an octave, completely stripping away the playful demeanor he had worn moments ago. I yanked my arm back and pulled my linen cuff down rapidly over the scar. "Work accident," I replied flatly, turning my back to him and reaching for the steamer handle again. I hoped my tone would close the door on the topic, just as it always had when curious acquaintances asked about it. Marcus did not drop it. He stared at my profile for 3 tense seconds, turned around without saying a word to Mason, and walked straight out into the courtyard. Through the glass doors, I watched him pull out his cell phone and dial Chief Vance at the Regional Wildfire Rescue Command. His posture had shifted completely, his shoulders were square, his feet planted, and his jaw set rigid as he spoke rapidly into the receiver. Mason snickered from the raised fitting platform, shaking his head as he adjusted his posture in front of the mirror. "Look at him!" Mason scoffed, glancing toward the courtyard. Marcus gets one phone call from his boss and acts like the building is on fire. Who makes emergency calls during a custom suit fitting anyway? My father Raymond chuckled again, swirling the ice in his glass, completely oblivious to the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. Families like mine excel at constructing comfortable, dismissive lies about quiet relatives. It is a psychological defense mechanism. Reducing a family member's complex sacrifices down to a convenient joke allows them to avoid examining their own vanity and self-centeredness. If they admitted for 1 second that my absence over the years was driven by life or death service rather than failure, they would be forced to confront how little they had ever offered in return. Exactly 20 minutes later, the heavy glass doors of the Oak Ridge tailor shop swung open. The casual chatter in the shop evaporated instantly. 2 high-ranking Special Operations Rescue commanders in dark, formal dress uniforms strode into the shop. Their brass medals gleamed under the shop's fluorescent lights, and the sheer authority of their presence made every groomsman in the room freeze. Commander Harrison led the way. He walked past Mason, past my father, and stopped precisely 2 feet in front of my steaming station. He looked straight at my face, brought his right hand up, and snapped a crisp, razor-sharp salute. "Rescue Leader 14, he whispered, his voice trembling slightly with profound respect. Marcus stepped back inside from the courtyard and turned to face Mason, whose face had gone completely blank. Marcus cleared his throat and spoke to the dead silent room. 8 years ago, at the Blackwood Ridge wildfire, a hotshot crew got trapped in an iron-walled canyon surrounded by 200-foot flames, Marcus said. The main escape line collapsed under burning timber. One single operator crawled into that hellfire alone with a chainsaw to clear the ridgeline. She evacuated 14 trapped firefighters. I was one of those 14 men, Mason, and your sister is the one who saved my life." Marcus's voice filled the fitting room, steady and unyielding, as he recounted the exact details of that afternoon on the ridge. He described how the secondary spot fire had ignited my protective jacket sleeve, and how instead of retreating, I had pinned the burning coat beneath my knee to finish cutting the firebreak line. He told the room how I had dragged him through choked brush to the clearing and helped load him into the medevac chopper before disappearing back into the smoke without ever giving my real name. Mason's mouth fell open, his smug expression disintegrating into pure shock. My father Raymond stood up so abruptly that his arm knocked his cup, sending dark coffee spilling across the glass table. Neither of them could process that the sister they mocked as a useless, unemployed wanderer was the decorated rescue operator who had saved their guest of honor. I did not pause to enjoy their horror. I calmly reached out, picked up the steamer, and finished smoothing the final seam on Mason's formal lapel. "Unfinished work has always bothered me," I said quietly, setting the nozzle down and turning toward the exit. As I crossed the gravel driveway, my father hurried out after me, calling my name with a panicked edge in his voice. He tried to offer a stuttering apology, struggling to reconcile his years of contempt with the reality standing before him. I stopped him gently with a raised hand. "Not today, Dad. Today is about suits," I said, walking up the garage stairs. The following evening, I sat at the formal Oak Ridge dining table across from Raymond and my mother Eleanor. For the first time in 8 years, I laid out my real history. I explained how I had joined the rescue service at 18 when Raymond's hardware supply firm had quietly collapsed, surrendering my own college fund so that the remaining family savings could send Mason to a private business university. I drew a slender folder from my bag and pushed a stack of bank statements across the mahogany-polished wood. The record showed automatic monthly transfers routed directly into the Oak Ridge property escrow account, covering the manor's $14,000 annual property taxes and full structural insurance consistently for 8 consecutive years. They had spent nearly a decade believing their home was sustained by Raymond's dwindling investments, completely unaware that the daughter they ridiculed was quietly funding their roof through high-hazard deployment pay. True guardians carry the heavy weight of family stability in complete silence, protecting those they love without demanding public applause or recognition. They bear physical scars and financial burdens so that others can live in comfortable safety. My silence had never been a confession of failure. It had been an act of unyielding, protective duty. My mother Eleanor broke down crying, her shoulders shaking violently as the realization set in. She wept when she understood that every single Sunday phone call I had made over those 10 agonizing months had come from the outdoor courtyard of a specialized thermal burn rehabilitation center. While she had spent those calls complaining about local garden center quotes and neighborhood gossip, I had been sitting in a wheelchair wrapped in compression bandages, forcing my voice to sound light and steady so she would never worry. Suddenly, the heavy front door slammed open, and Mason stormed into the room, his face flushed dark red with anger. "You let us look like ignorant fools in front of my groomsmen!" he shouted, pointing an accusing finger at me. "You sat there silently while we joked, knowing Commander Harrison and Marcus were going to show up and ruin my fitting!" I stood my ground, looking him directly in the eye without a trace of flinching. "I let you be wrong, Mason," I replied, my voice calm, level, and unyielding. "You chose how loudly to announce it." For 2 full days, I refused to grant him an easy exit from his shame. When people spend years constructing a superficial narrative driven by vanity and material status, they develop a false sense of power over those who work in silence. Mason had built his pride on a thin foundation of business degrees and expensive tailors, assuming my lack of self-promotion meant a lack of value. I knew that rushing to console him or downplay my past would only enable his bad behavior. Real growth requires sitting in the discomfort of one's own arrogance. At dawn on the 3rd day, a soft, hesitant knock sounded at my garage apartment door. I opened it to find Mason standing on the porch in the gray morning light, holding 2 cheap paper cups of black coffee from the local gas station. His eyes were red-rimmed, and his usual posture was gone. "Tell me the whole story," Mason asked quietly, setting a cup on the wooden table. "Your version." So I did. I sat across from him and detailed the suffocating, pitch-black smoke of Blackwood Ridge, the intense, radiant heat that warped the protective visor on my helmet, and the relentless fireline checklist I kept repeating in my head while my coat ignited. I explained to him that true courage is rarely dramatic or loud. Usually, it is simply suppressing your fear and taking the next necessary step to keep someone else alive. When I finished, Mason lowered his head into his hands. "I called you useless," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I called you a burden in front of the exact man whose life you saved." Mason demonstrated his transformation not with dramatic promises, but through direct, quiet action. When the seating charts were finalized for the engagement banquet at Oak Ridge Manor, he moved my place setting from the rear overflow table directly to the main family table. He stripped the vanity stories and self-serving bios from the event website. Most importantly, he asked my permission before extending formal invitations to Marcus and the 2 veteran rescue operators who had served on the ridge. He ensured there would be no public circus, no forced dramatics, and no attempt to commercialize my past. At the banquet, I sat down at the head table beneath the glowing courtyard lights. Beside my dinner plate lay a single folded card of heavy cream cardstock. I opened it to find Marcus's clean, precise handwriting, listing 14 names. There was no lavish praise, no medal citations, and no speech written inside, just 14 names of the men who had walked off Blackwood Ridge 8 years ago. When the time came for toasts, Mason stood up, clearing his throat as he held his glass. He didn't boast about stock portfolios or high-end tailors. He looked across the room and thanked the sister who had taught him that showing up for people is silent work you do long before anyone notices. He spoke of how I had quietly protected our family's foundation without ever demanding a round of applause. He lifted his glass, took a sip, and looked away, giving me the dignity of privacy even while honoring my truth. Later in the evening, as the band played soft jazz, my father Raymond walked over and asked me to dance. As we stepped onto the wooden floor, he looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I told the wrong story about you for 8 long years, Clara," he whispered, his voice thick with genuine emotion. "I am done telling false stories. From tonight on, I'm just going to be proud." Near midnight, as the formal party began to wind down, I joined Marcus and the veteran rescuers at a quiet iron table in the corner of the garden. There were no grand speeches or formal salutes, just ordinary conversation about structural roofing jobs, local fire codes, and high school sports. I reached down and rolled both of my long sleeves up to my elbows. The thick, grafted thermal burn tissue on my left arm rested openly under the warm courtyard string lights. Nobody stared, nobody gasped. That completely ordinary, quiet moment felt greater than any silver medal. For 8 long years, I had hidden those scars under buttoned cuffs to protect my family from uncomfortable questions and to hide from their dismissive judgment. Leaving them uncovered was not an act of anger, confession, or revenge. It was simply my life finally being allowed to breathe. Ultimate justice isn't about destroying the people who doubted you or burning down your family home. It is about building an unshakable internal worth that completely outgrows their recognition. My value had been forged in the heat of Blackwood Ridge, and it had never waited for their permission to exist. The next morning at dawn, I walked down the gravel driveway of Oakridge Manor carrying my single duffel bag. I boarded the regional transit bus bound for the rescue station, both sleeves rolled high against the cool morning air. My family's respect had arrived late, but my dignity had been mine all along. Thank you for watching. If Clara's journey inspired you to stand tall in your own truth, share this story with someone who needs to hear it today.